It has to, for me, it's got to have a voice. It's got to have uh, some sort of rhythm live, that you feel it. Versus, I love techno and I know the power of techno, and the brilliance of techno. But that's not me. To me, it's too mechanical. As a dancer, I like more rhythms than, yeah, I love rhythm. I love live.
Boom. We are back again today with the legendary DJ Jeannie Hopper of Liquid Sound Lounge. Is house music dead or does it just smell funny?
Funny good or funny bad?
You tell me.
I would say it's as ever diverse as there are smells. How's that?
That's so great.
No, it's funny because like what comes to my mind is the how genres suddenly exploded like, rabbits.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So when I think of smells, I think of different aromas more than smell, using the word smell. So yeah, different tastes, different smells, different aromas.
Well said. Unpack that.
All right. So now you're going to do the 1-word, 2-word questions on me, huh? We talked about like people that give 1-word answers, the challenge of doing interviews. Unpack that. Well, I think I just did. Lots of genres, lots of scenes. And it's still very exciting that it is a global phenomenon. I think having the internet, it's more accessible than ever to people. However, I still believe that the business model, it's so interesting because like anything, you're going to have big business want to capitalize on. And I feel like that is what happened, with the story of the attack of the club scene for various reasons. That would be a whole other series of interviews. Here, when I talk about New York, Giuliani comes to mind, economics changing come to mind, accessibility for the culture and the art form as somebody starting out, I think is more difficult because we were all very brick and mortar, at least when I started. So you had a small, you had a mid-size, and then, large, extra large that you could grow into as a DJ when it came to spaces and crowds. So I think it was more organic. And it was before the being a record producer was what drove who was booked and who was on a bill. So it's just very, very different. So what happened then, right? So we lost a lot of our, for quite a while, mega clubs. And when I say mega, like even Output people would think is big. It wasn't really that big of a club in size. In name, yes. Um, in comparison to what was the footprint of the original Sound Factory or even the second um, location using the name Sound Factory, on what became Pacha in New York, that space. So the mega clubs kind of ended, but it was a chilling kind of time too, because festivals after what happened with Woodstock reunion And all of a sudden it was like, nobody's going to give you insurance to do such a big festival like that. It's going to be really expensive. And so that put the bar up, meaning like you would have to be somebody that was business minded, corporate minded, to then, you know, go into how to capitalize on what had been created before and take it to a new place when you don't have any brick and mortar. So I think that's when the you know, festivals kind of really grew exponentially overseas. And I think finally it happened here because of talents that had left here and were in Europe, um, releasing records that became more pop song like what I would call Euro house, really. In some sense. Um, and you know, drove that sound to be festival worthy, um, in terms of festival worthy of investment here in the United States. What do I mean by that? Um, the guy who had created Live Nation, and then he sold it. I think it was to Clear Channel at the time, or somehow they were in cahoots. And then he creates Beatport, and then he creates, you know, so it's like this whole like big business model of music that shifted into that and corporatizing it. So I feel like I call it like the corporate club scene, and then you have your grassroots organic, you could call it the mom and pop scene, you know, or DIY it's called, you know, scene. So um those are the different aromas. Um and part of the corporate club scene too is suddenly in Manhattan, you know, clubs being in hotels. Um so there's also money behind it and needed, but it's a business model, right? So brand recognition, coolness, um for your brand, and genuinely loving the lifestyle. And when people come to town, yeah, you know, if you're somebody that loves great music, of course you might just want to stay at the Standard instead. You know, staying at the, I don't know what hotels these days, so, or the W, right? Which is interesting because it comes out of a person that had started Studio 54. So, and then even after the cabaret law was finally abolished here, um, taken off the books, you know, the conversations when the nightlife office became a part of the mayor's office on media and entertainment here in New York, still very new. I mean, it only started, you know, before a pandemic hit. Had it only been around for about maybe a year, with somebody at the head, Ariel, who was somebody that actually had a club. Well, it was a bar lounge on the Lower East Side, and did get involved locally in her community board. Um, and, you know, so I found it interesting where she had to sit in a moment and recognize, and has to, both sides, the DIY scene and the corporate. And I bring this up because it shows you that it's very real. Um, and they're both legitimate models. Um, one comes with a lot of money, the other comes with constant challenges of how do I bring to life, or, you know, my vision and my love and my passion of creativity in a space. I think House of Yes is a good example of that. And bridging both worlds, because they have, and it's still a relatively I would call it a medium-sized club in space. You know, it's like all signs point to the Jefferson stop on the L train. That's where there's the concentration of the club scene, and then going into Maspeth and Ridgewood. So pushed into industrial areas, because we still have a lot of issues with zoning. Dancing is only allowed, that law, there's still like some stipulations in zoning as to where a club and dancing can be, to the point that even out in Maspeth, I heard that the industry there, like I'm talking manufacturing, like real industry there, they want it taken out because they're in fear that they may lose their affordable space to do their business, because the club scene comes, then they'll see an appeal and a gentrification that will start. And that's also been a classic thing in the city too, is to try to pit creatively and cleverly developers against a neighborhood that's being gentrified, and use artists as this kind of pawn in the middle, right? So you think you're in a neighborhood that's, because now you can afford to have a space there because the real estate is more affordable, your commercial space, to start something. But then all of a sudden, because of the history of what that means from Soho on, downtown Manhattan, where the club scene and cultural scenes of music were flourishing, you know, it's very real. So I think if the city itself doesn't recognize that and value creating and understanding spaces for cultural growth and development, and the value of that, planting those seeds and what will grow into. And we have many examples, right? RuPaul, Madonna. So it's, anyways, so that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about that kind of what's happened in a business model sense. I know that was a long answer to a question that started with aroma.
That's perfect. That's fine.
Sorry. I think about this stuff a lot because as a journalist, which is number one, where I started out as a journalist, you know, I'm forever, and also growing up with a father who's an engineer, I'm forever trying to pick apart things and figure out how they work, you know, what makes them work.
What happened to New York nightlife, and what role did Giuliani play, if any?
He played a role where he was trying to be tough on crime, and from his days of being district attorney, when the city was actually had the mob had a great deal of power over the city, and that's what he was after. Now there's legal mafia and there's illegal mafia. These days, I think a lot of us feel like, you know, especially after the crash of 2008, that, you know, the banks are legal mafia in a sense, right? Starts to feel that way. And not the first time. But I think his a combination of looking tough on crime. I think the club scene was kind of ripe to be attacked, because I was even shocked when I moved to New York in the late 80s. The visibility of drug use right out in the open, you did not see that anywhere else, at least where I came from in the Midwest. You did not, period. And I thought to myself, oh, and I'm not kidding, I really thought to myself the first time I saw it, I was like, wow, this could end bad. And so think about mafia, garbage pickup, uh drivers for trucks transporting whatever is needed, alcohol, right? Like those kinds of things. But at the same time, um being able to crack the city to open it up for mass development, developing of luxury high rises. So the appeal for people to no longer be a bridge and tunnel scene where, the people come into the city to work and then leave, or come in to experience clubs and mix with the folks that are the creators in the clubs and were actually living downtown. And when it wasn't desirable for people to live downtown, maybe Soho, but people were living more in Midtown. So I think that hyper development, opening the city to that, changed things too, because all of a sudden people wanted to come back into the city and live in the city. And what happened? Noise complaints. So Bloomberg kind of carried into that one, the 311 hotline being created. The number one thing immediately was noise complaints, right? So who has the right? A brick and mortar club like CBGB's that's been there forever, and has made so many cultural contributions, or the building across the street that now is this luxury high rise that doesn't like the noise and doesn't want to see that. And then maybe it's still a dedication to that person, to that club, by that landlord, but all of a sudden the cost of the cost of living goes up because that luxury high rise has brought more value to the neighborhood in terms of raising the cost of living there. So now that other person that landlord, very dedicated to, and I'm not saying this is what happened with CBGBs. This is just me using it as a example. You could call it Club X. The landlord's going to raise the rent. And then you can't afford it anymore. You can only raise your drink prices so much. And that's what I saw also, a big shift. Was the first thing that happened was creating a nightlife task force that literally went out and attacked clubs. I'm sorry, excessive force. For you to be DJing in a spot and like 20 guys show up looking like, they're the DEA with their task force jackets on and stuff, and peak hour in a club and just showing up. And then the lights have to come on. Well, guess what happens? Everybody leaves. Your peak hour, right? Now, I don't know of any health inspector that was allowed to walk into McDonald's and shut them down because they have a health violation, or just walk in there like that with 20 people and intimidate like that. It was really horrible. And to the point that a live music venue like Knitting Factory, when a band was about to hit the stage, I think it was Brooklyn Funk Essentials, and the manager has to get on the stage before they start and say, you can't dance because we don't have a cabaret license. It got that bad. And right next to right where you're DJing, a big sign saying no dancing allowed. It's like a big WTF. It was bad. And I mean, I worked closely with like Norman Siegel, who had taken on a few cases. Had him on my show many times. He was a real champion of trying to get to the bottom of it. I think he came out of the ACLU. And yeah, it was bad. It was bad. And people like to say, oh, Peter Gation, he had too much control. He needs to be controlled because he has a monopoly on the club scene. This is before Giuliani came in, right? So we had um Tunnel Club, Limelight, um Club USA in Times Square for a while. um I forget if he owned Palladium for a while. I'm not sure. And well, he was ripe to be attacked. Um Again, because of the open drug use, I think, that was going on, especially in Limelight, with the party with, oh, what's his name? That since has died. That was sent to jail because he killed Angel, who was a club promoter, in a very sick way. I think it was a sick time with drugs too. Um, but we used to always say, you know what, you can go down to Wall Street and you can find ton of heroin, you can find a ton of, I mean, it was an easy target, I think. Um, and it's just sad because they didn't value so much of the good side. I feel like, because then, when I DJed in Toronto, it was amazing. They had a club zone. And so that was number one that took precedent, was clubs in that zone. So, and also, the rave scene and all the laws that were trying to be passed around that, right? Um, like, I think the Rave Act is still on the books. And I worked with Drug Policy Alliance on bringing awareness to the club scene that this was very real, and it could easily be weaponized against any spot. What it basically said is, anybody that was working in that club, whether you're a bathroom attendant, a bartender, a bar back, a DJ, you are now liable for anybody doing drugs in that in your club. Anybody being found with it, everybody's guilty or could be found guilty being connected to it. And it's like, what? So it was a very dark time. Um, and I remember having one of our events, or one of the a conference that Drug Policy Alliance did. They had some representatives from Scotland Yard, from London, and it was really interesting. They talked about how they changed things around. They said, we have to value what the scene does in terms of actually bringing income and paying taxes and the value of it. So they worked with the clubs instead of vilifying the clubs. They rooted out those bad players, but they did it with the respect of those that actually, you know, were had a real business going on there, and respected it, the music, and they understood what kind of culture and what comes up and out of it and the value of it. So it's kind of all over the place answer, but um yeah, he really started a guillotine that really took out. And the saddest thing to me, Moema, is so many talents in this city that were just, in essence, which they'll never recognize, were just cut off at the knees, because not only those that were established, their livelihood suddenly being attacked, but then creating this situation where still I feel like it's an industry that it's not a very equitable industry. um you're probably going to make less than somebody made, before this all started, now. So I think people, like musicians, should also be respected and paid a living wage, and that should increase through time to match what a living wage is. And that's what's not happening. And if you don't do that, then people don't have the ability to be mainstayers. And as we see here, most talents end up making their money out of the country. They're not making it from record sales. That's a whole other conversation about the tech industry. But I'll leave it at that.
Talk to us about being a DJ, being a female DJ, and being white. Tell us about your journey.
Well, I think first of all, um, I never looked in those kind of binaries of myself. And I have to say, I led genuinely and still do with my heart and with what I love. And um, the work that I had done that led me into DJing, being a political reporter on the front lines, in Central America, and in the Middle East, in Palestine. Um, I don't know. I had a very different uh, view of the world and humanity coming out of that. So, and also being raised by a father who, more so than having a strong uh, mother figure. So I had a lot of, I was very fearless and genuine and led with love. And also my love was to, when I finally had that soapbox, which was, 99.5 FM, 50,000 watts. That's my roots, is radio. Um, community radio. Community radio that is funded by the listeners. So it creates a different dynamic. I have an incredible amount of respect, and that respect for those listeners is reciprocated by them donating. And I was probably one of the most successful music shows, which is not easy to raise money with music, even before there was an internet, for a music program, because people in this country have been conditioned to take music for granted, and that it's free or it's disposable. How do you get it free, and not have in the forefront, oh, I want to support this artist. It's equity. Um, um, for them to be able to continue and carry on and give us more, right? So that's where I approached the scene, and I think the support that I did initially in promoting the music and genuinely bringing people to the air, I think I think that's where those binaries faded for a lot of people. I would like to think in the scene. I wasn't thinking like that when I was back then, but I think about it now because I feel like we were more polarized and divided than at that time. Because the beautiful thing that I saw was in the clubs that the scene was very, very mixed. At least the scenes I was going to, and I feel like the majority of them were. Um, the dance floor was incredibly unifying, and I don't think the city will ever get that back. We have it in small pockets because of people that still carry on from that same spirit because they know it and they've experienced it, and now those that are recreating it are, um, passing it on. And there's something about dancing that scares the shit out of the powers that be, because all of a sudden people are talking and getting together and they're getting along. And so for me personally, it was, that's why I think, and I don't think, I, th- I think people, when they get into labeling in that manner, I think a lot of times it happens out of frustration out of already, the roots of the scene absolutely comes from Black gay culture. It comes from hippie culture, if you want to go back to David Mancuso. It comes from a culture that was about inclusivity. And I feel like I came into the scene when that was still there, more prominent. Now I feel just out of how the economics have shifted this city, it's not intentional that it happened, but it makes sense because economics becomes class. And that's what I see is more than anything is a lot of kind of classism that happens in this city. And it's very easy to pit people against each other by the color of their skin um or by their sexual orientation. Um and I think unless you are conscious and constantly working on yourself to be conscious of it, um we have been conditioned, no matter what you want to believe, um by the mainstream media, which is very narrow. um and I think we are now, especially since the pandemic, since George Floyd, are even more so aware, you know, and hopefully that will continue to keep change flowing. Where does that fit with me personally? Um, More the female side was the part that finally did get a little frustrating. I mean, in rudimentary terms, it was kind of funny because I'd be DJing and a male DJ would be standing next to me and they'd be holding their breath as I made a transition between records and then look at me and be like, "Oh, that was good. That was really good. Like, good job." And I'm like, "What the?" You know? And then the almighty great job as a female DJ. And it's like, as a female DJ, how about just great fucking job, you know? Um, but again, um, it's a conditioning too, it's a socialization because you don't see so many women. And now you see more, but do you see them on the bills, the bigger bills? No. So it takes, it's already an extremely competitive industry, whatever your sexual orientation is, whatever the color of your skin, because there's so few opportunities. And I think oftentimes you have to stop yourself when you start to, and this is my advice. If you start to think in those binaries like that, stop yourself and correct yourself. It takes a lot to get us out of that kind of conditioning. Um, so yeah, and definitely when I was lucky enough to break through and be a touring DJ for like 4 or 5 years. That was my bread and butter. Um, However, and um, it still was so competitive that when I needed advice or I needed contacts or connections, they weren't coming as readily anymore. In the beginning, they did a bit, but that's where I experienced, and I will be very honest, that's where I experienced the glass ceiling. And that's the first time that I experienced such a boys club, because I was able to break through that and achieve that when I was one-on-one, face-to-face with people, but I was not able to do that in a longevity sense. And I still, meaning like beyond the 5 years, And on top of it, dealing with the economics of the scene changing here in New York. So all of a sudden it went from I would actually be able to supplement my touring money with actual, being my gigs were paid here in New York. And suddenly that disappeared too. Or it was less. And so that was hard. And of course, everybody, well, people may or may not know. Then in '99, I started doing boat parties because I was frustrated with what was going on with the attack on the club scene. And I always wanted to create my own space where people would come and could be unified and feel as warm and intimate as they did through the experience of hearing the show every week. And that was less and less. There was less and less spaces to find that, um, because especially compounded by the cost for their establishments rising, them having to make decisions accordingly. Before, people used to invest in you at an establishment and you would have a residency, and together you would build a party or a night so it was equitable for the establishment, for you, for the promoter. And oftentimes they were promoters with the club. They weren't like me, my own party. I have to have a promoter. And the first time I come in there, I've got a hit like that, I mean, where's the middle ground, right? To build. So I started doing boat parties. And I found that uh older school, now I'll call it, relationship with the boat owner. And we it was great, had a 20-year run doing boat parties every year. um and that's where I found space. And that's where um yeah, I could have my, in-person radio party, so to speak. Because I was lucky too to be on the radio. I managed to meet people. I was invited into people's personal spaces. It was a very intimate experience when you love a show on the radio. Um, and I was able to be the personality as well as selecting the music, but I always called it also cultural alchemy too. So to be able to speak, be the voice of the scene, um, and hopefully turn more people onto the scene. And there was no internet, so nobody knew what I looked like either. And when people did meet me, oftentimes they were shocked. They were like, "Oh my God." This one kid, he's like, "I thought you were like this 6'2" Cleopatra Jones." Like, and I think you see that too in like that '70s show. Remember when The Voice, and he comes out and he's this little guy, like, you know. So I think our voice has a lot of power. It's our, it's, you said intention. Our voice is very genuine. It's your spirit. It's you being able to verbalize your spirit, you know, and into the ether. So yeah, I think I was able to overcome a lot of barriers um because of, I don't know, that interesting ingredients of how I came into the scene. And also being a promoter and marketer of music first before I started DJing. I developed a lot of great relationships. And I genuinely, I mean, you want to talk about being an activist. I was like a music activist. I mean, I was like, this is the best thing. It's so good. And I learned that I had an ear for music too, in that too, because I wouldn't, I would never promote anything that I didn't love myself, as musically. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into specific stories, specific names, specific parties, specific people, whether locally or internationally. I just don't want to, because there's so much in this scene. People are so frustrated. So oftentimes when we go into and not realize um, you know, that those binaries are influencing our decisions, our ego. Um, I think you have to look at the bigger picture and realize maybe I need to take a time out, and it's not an easy industry to be in. Um, the rewards are more from the joy of being able to have people collectively dancing and grooving together, you know. That's the rewards, and I feel very blessed, and very blessed with the relationships I have in the industry and continue to have. And yeah, I was very lucky.
What is Soulful House?
For me, soulful house is always means that there has to be some sort of a human element in it, a voice, a live instrument. Nowadays it's kind of interesting with the whole with technology, advancements, um that now I feel like you could be a soulful electronic performer. Because Ableton Live has broken a lot of barriers between being that studio mole to being able to be in front of a crowd. um DJ Shaky's Warper Party, I think, is a testament to that. I don't know if you're familiar. So the Warper Party's been going on for ever since there's been warping. You know what warping is? So warping is when you are well, I would say now it's built into, Tractor or Scratch software. So what it does is it warps to so you're on the 4 beat, so that you're in sync. But you had to manually do it. You had to place in those warper marks um and show where that beat was. Um it's more of an Ableton thing. When you bring a song in, so that you can then work with it and mix with it live. And it also, it's the difference between Ableton and a DAW, a digital audio workstation like Logic or Pro Tools, is, although now Logic's for a long time now, you can use it live too. But the unique thing with Ableton is there's what's called the clip view. So the clip view allows you to create, it's kind of a vertical, different tracks, or you say channels, I call them channels, and you create different clips. So this one has the snare in it, that then my next clip might have the snare with a certain effect added to it, and then I might have another clip where that drum track is grouped and then breaks down in a different way. And what's cool is you can play it live that way. So you can have like 100 clips over the course of let's say like 7 or 8 channels, and you can literally, you trigger them and you can have fun, and you can do it live. It's not like you have to render it first to then play it. And you can patch a musician in live, and you can actually have it loop back in, so you're recording them and you can sample them in the moment and then mess around and create another clip. So it's really powerful. So that's why I say on the soulful side, it's getting to the point too that, yeah, you can electronically play very soulfully too. um if you choose to. But that party, that's where people come together that are electronic music performers. And in some cases, they're also light jockeys. So you can program them, Ableton, to run lights. And you can program, you can even work with a video within Ableton as well, to score music for a video too. So it's incredible. So soulful music, um, So at that party, they have 2 rooms, and while one person's setting up, you have to be able to come do your setup, have a right left in, and that's what you give to, and you patch into that soundboard for that room, you know, and you have to be self-sufficient. So if you choose to have a musician or 2 with you, you have to be the engineer to set them up. Um and then everybody gets, I think, like a 20 or 30-minute set. And this is going on in both rooms, because they're kind of stuck between not being considered um, somebody that a live music venue would book, and they're also not somebody that a club would book. So it's kind of the in between. Um, Although now I feel like absolutely. I mean, that's what, when I see some of these, festivals and big stages, right? I mean, oftentimes it's like, I'm sorry, their set is already prepared because it syncs with the lights, it syncs with, so yes, there was a tremendous amount of work done before they got to that moment. But then there is some improving that happens, and in some cases. So in my generation of the 90s, um, it would be people that were in the world of like propeller heads, when Reason got developed by the propeller heads, and when Future Sounds of London, so there are people that have been doing this, but it seemed more mechanical and electronic and less kind of soulful and rhythmic. So that's my long answer to your short question. It has to have, for me, it's got to have a voice, it's got to have uh some sort of rhythm live, that you feel it. Versus, I love techno and I know the power of techno, and the brilliance of techno. But that's not me. To me, it's too mechanical. As a dancer, I like more rhythms than yeah, I love rhythm. I love live.
How come
And
anyone?
and also Mel Sharon used to call it danceable R&B.
Mhm.
I guess he kind of said, I don't know, don't quote me on that one though. But
Mhm.
he was always trying to say where the soulful side of house music fit was like it was up tempo R&B. It had a little more of a, that soul connection, soulful house.
How come anyone hardly uses soulful house as a descriptive term outside of NYC?
Because I think it's something that came out of New York. You can say it came out of Chicago too. But that's, I don't even know why that answer came to me so quickly. But this is where I have been a part of the house scene. And the funny thing is too, is I can tell you, oh, there's Jersey house, there's Baltimore house, there's, each, that was the fun thing, touring and learning about, it's kind of a unique sound or rhythm that was
Tell
going
us about
on.
those two.
Jersey house to me is that gospel, beautiful, full vocal, like, I don't know what it was, but there was a lot of it coming out of New Jersey. And definitely out of Baltimore, between the Pope and OGs and others there. Um, Whereas Chicago to me is kind of like in between West Coast house and Detroit, with a little bit of New York mixed in. West Coast seemed to have almost like this kind of techie, because you could actually have raves that had big spaces, right? In the desert or wherever. But it almost had kind of like the term Balearic, a Balearic kind of sound to it, which is a really unique sound. And some people have come to me and they've said, you're the only one I ever hear kind of mixing in this kind of sound. And Oh, what's a good example? Who's the guy from Everything But the Girl?
Fred.
No.
Oh, yeah. I know who you're talking about.
Oh, I can't remember his name. Oh my God, and he had such a great label.
Ben, Ben, Ben,
Ben,
Ben
yes.
Watt, Ben Watt.
Ben Watt. His label, that to me is an example of kind of Balearic, or the Hard Kiss Brothers. Um yeah, once you get into, and also for me, my sound, I didn't even know what my sound was. I would just call it a liquid sound because number one, when I started spinning it was for the radio, and I would receive hundreds of promos. And for me, it was about how many can I get on the air once I pulled the cream of the crop out for me, for my ears. And then I was like, how can I get this all on the air? Because I love to hear something that was had a break in it, or I'd love to hear something that was straight up gospel house, or I love to hear what we call tribal, that now people are calling. I feel like maybe the Afro tech scene is a part of that, but it used to be very mixed with also Latin music and on the tribal scene. Um, so for me, my sound was all over the place, and that's also what becomes more difficult to book somebody back then, at least, especially in the 90s, um, that you couldn't put their sound in a genre. Um, and I was adamant about that. It's just like, this is how I spin, this is what I do. And so it probably took longer than to, adhere to a specific genre or subgenre in the scene. Um, yeah.
What is Afro House versus Amapiano versus Kwaito?
I've never gotten into kind of the minutia in Afro House of breaking it down, because to me it's the beautiful thing about rhythm. It's almost infinite, right? So it influenced us from Africa through the islands, unfortunately through slavery, especially, and then merging with what I consider like I call it campesino music, which is what would be the country music of maybe Colombia, or you have Garifuna, which is also a fusion of those rhythms that came over, and then kind of made them unique to their own, which is a culture of especially escaped slaves that populated the East Coast. So you have blue fields in Nicaragua, you have Honduras, Belize. Um, so for me, the full circle is now um, the actual different rhythms and styles of music, genres in Africa, around the continent, in the different countries, kind of also meeting electronics, right? And that's the exciting thing, is to see then what happens. Because it's like, to me, music is a living organism. I don't know if you've ever seen that special on what mushrooms are to this planet. Um, and how they keep the whole ecosystem filtering and talking to each other. I feel like that's what rhythm is, you know. So I do remember the early days of like Victor Simonelli and Keith Thompson, um, music that they were putting out that was getting played all over, especially South Africa, and then meeting up with the scene there, or this watching the scene kind of grow from there. I remember Black Coffee coming over and playing. I don't think it was a Masters at Work party. It might have been. Um, but yeah, to me, it was just like a full circle. And also the meeting of what can electronics do? Because the exciting thing too with technology is now it's accessible not only to women, which it wasn't so accessible because of our electronics and our laptops and our devices, right? Um, that what was there's like this name for it. It's kind of funny. In Brazil, but it's based on this program that people use, and it kind of became the name of the genre. But it was about sampling, and now you had the tool in an app that you could do this sampling and create your own music. So I think that's what's kind of exciting, and that's what's happening throughout the continent, not only of Africa, but I think we're going to see more. Hopefully, we will. Um, Coming out of even India, and we see already an explosion in Dubai, and with clubs and music and locals there. There's still a lot of influence though with pop music, out of the US, what I consider pop music or mainstream charting music. Yeah, it's forever yeah, living, breathing organism that's constantly feeding into itself, you know. It's exciting. Um and also they had, the the music hit the radio there in South Africa. That made a big difference. So if you hit mainstream radio, that's huge. To break a genre. That's why I think the UK also was always so popular, where house music was more popular than over here because it was more accessible. I know. So you could actually not only make a living but become a star. I mean, this is the first decade or two that we've had DJs that are millionaires, right? Think about that. Because of the festival scene, and definitely because of the way that a culture and economically it's embraced and uplifted, like in South Africa, I think, on the radio. So it changes things dramatically. Access to those mediums, and people could say, "Oh, who listens to the radio anymore?" Well, there's a fuckload of a lot of people that listen to the radio still, especially when you're sitting there and it's the only thing that you have available to you, because you don't have a smartphone that has enough bandwidth or near a Wi-Fi, in your small town somewhere. Yeah. So that's as deep as I'm going to get on that one. Me, I always called it tribal because dance music's very tribal in nature as well as in terms of rhythms and sound. And also we were in different tribes, right? So for me here, there was like this tribe of, funk and soul people, then the tribe of the harder house, and then the tribe of electro and breaks, then the tribe, I love it all. So me, it's all about this tribal alchemy for me. Yeah, can't we just all get along? Sometimes those beats don't, though. It is a train wreck, but you know how to work it, it works.
What happened to the dance departments at major labels?
Ooh.
Explain to people what the dance departments at major labels were first.
Well, they're actually, I'll tell you, they were, dance music was kind of referred to as like the bastard genre. So there's all these clubs going on. I mean, you could go back to Frankie Crocker, really, a testament to mining the scene for tunes and then bringing them to the radio, right? And out of that comes, you know, brings the interest of major labels. So I say bastardized because bastard genre, because they always seem to, at least in my time, want to take an artist. You know, you've got the Billboard dance chart. How does the Billboard dance chart work? I don't know if it still works the same way, but you had jocks all over the country, and they were selected to be a Billboard reporter. They would get X amount of records, a lot of them from the major labels, and then they would have to report into that chart that made up that Billboard dance chart, right? It's a very it's a business model, it's a corporate structure. So for since hip hop, I think, and electronics coming in, you know, you were suddenly able to oh, even before that though, disco maybe. I'm not sure where dance departments first started. That you'd have to ask, you know, some of our even more veterans or legacy folks in the scene, like Bobby Shaw or um oh my God, the other names I'm thinking of, they've already passed. David Yurman was the head of a dance department. Rick Scalante, who's since passed. But they saw it as a viable genre and scene. And why do I keep saying bastard? Because they would love to get an artist remixed in that style and then get exposure, greater exposure for that artist in a different scene. Oftentimes, those then at that time it was vinyl and 12 inches with the remixes. A lot of the actual Billboard DJs would be the remixers. For instance, Tracy Young, you know, remixed a lot of Madonna's records, which brought her some to great recognition. And you know, so that's kind of how it works. It works as a way of quantifying um you know, some record sales and plays through those charts. So I think that's what the dance departments were really a part of. Of course, there's original dance artists. So you have 10 City, right? You had CNC Music Factory. You had and again, this is from my time, but I feel like the 80s too, you had a lot. And also they were kind of, you know, yeah, I mean they saw it hitting and they created a department that made sense. But it definitely came out of, I think, electronic music entering the dance scene, because you can call all kinds of music dance music. I mean, country music is dance music. It depends on what part of it. But electronic dance music, I think, is the unique part. Before that was disco. But I feel like synthesizers and things were, so here you hear me trying to come up with an answer, but instead it's like I'm just sharing with you what comes to my mind in terms of my experience from being in the industry, working that Billboard chart, and why a label would even have a department and spend that money. Since then, I think it's interesting though, because then you have like The Weeknd, right? I'm like, that's house music, right? So, but I don't know that he would be in the dance department, you know? I don't even know if they have a black music department anymore. That was a thing. We were the only country in the world that had that. And I think people that are more in the record label world would have to fill you in on that, because I was much more in the indie record label world, including with my own label, you know. Yeah.
So what happened to dance departments?
I don't know.
They just evaporated. Tell us about your label.
I actually, I don't know. I really don't know.
They just
I think
dissolved.
maybe they got dissolved or absorbed into and also you think of it, it's an old business model that we're talking about, and now we're in the digital world. So now they're all just kind of looking to find, you know, the next YouTube star, right? Even though the Billboard chart still continues, and there still continues to be Billboard reporters. So sorry, they're working on the building. That's what that weird noise is. I don't know if you hear it.
Same here. Same here.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's
no, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
That sounds like a 10-part podcast series.
Seriously, seriously.
What happened to the dance music labels of major?
Exactly. What are the three most unforeseen yet most impactful changes in the DJ profession?
Unforeseen?
Yeah, so basically how is a professional DJ today different from a professional DJ when you know, started whatever 20 years?
I think that that you've produced music and you have music out. And I also think it's definitely digital. I don't know too many vinyl purists that are new. There's a niche scene of that still here. You know, I used to do until the pandemic hit a party called a Dynamite Dance Party, and that's where I brought out all my vinyl and had fun going through old vinyl and not a lot of new vinyl. But I feel like so much music came out on vinyl through the 80s and 90s and even the early 2000s until probably like 2000. We oftentimes we talk about I have talked about with several people, like kind of what was that last big record that hit on vinyl, right? And a lot of us think of Barbara Tucker, Dennis Ferrer's remix of Precious Love from that project that Mel Sharon had worked on that was on King Street, which was Dance Artists United for Life, which was part of to benefit Lifebeat, which is the music industry fights AIDS. And so yeah, just to give people a marker, I think that's when kind of people really shifted. And I want to say that was like around 2003, 2004 that remix circulated and was big. Maybe it was a little earlier than that. I think grouping together as a collective makes a difference. I think you see more pairs of DJs who work together and produce together. I feel like DJing has become so accessible because of the technical side being so accessible now. Like I could have a DJ program for free on my phone in 2 seconds, right? I had a little kid, not a little kid. I had a 16-year-old ask me, so what is DJing? I mean, I see, you know, at the dance at school, there's a kid that lives in Iowa. I see, you know, somebody comes and they play some music, you know, at our high school dance, but what is DJing? And I was just like, wow. how times have changed that you actually have to ask that. Uh, but I think at the heart, it's still about, a love and a passion to make people, collectively groove together, period. You know, um, I think for some, sure, you want to get the hit record out there, but that hit record is ultimately what becomes the calling card for you to get booked. More so than, hey, that guy really spins well. Like, you just don't, those aren't the people that you see at a big festival or that you see maybe on some side stages. I don't know.
Mm.
Yeah. Because the term's been bantied around, or what's the word I'm looking for? Volleyed around a lot. And for me, the term DJ really comes from disc jockey because you were on the radio, right? The term came from the radio, jockeying discs on the radio. So I don't know now. Except that, again, I think it's still about getting people to collectively groove together.
How'd you come up with the name Liquid Sound Lounge?
Oh, well, originally the show, I did a couple specials first before I got a slot, and I called them Adventures in the World of House for a couple shows. And it was more about going and dancing, because I was not a DJ when I started the show. Everybody heard me become a DJ. And I didn't have DJ equipment at the station. Meaning like club kind of DJ style. I really just had radio gear. And I didn't have the gear or the money to go buy a bunch of gear and bring it to the station every week. That just wasn't feasible. But Liquid Sound Lounge came about from lounge was more about intimacy and like saying club, being together, close proximity. I like it in Spanish, salon. And the liquid and sound part, I really derived from the hours and hours of dancing. I mean, I would go start dancing at 2 a.m. and not stop sometimes till 4 o'clock the next day. And the print on your shirt would literally wash off because you sweat so much. So it was about getting so liquid because our bodies are mostly liquid, and sound acts as a wave as well, like water. And so to me, that's where the sound lounge, Liquid Sound Lounge, comes from. If I could go back in time, I would make it 2 words, but
What would it be?
either Liquid Sound or Liquid Lounge. Because probably Liquid Sound. And it was okay. When there was only one search engine online, when the internet came about, remember, it was Yahoo. And if you search Liquid Sound Lounge, there was 3 things that would come up. 3. There was, I think, a place called Liquid Sound, which was, I want to say it was a audio studio, recording studio. And then there was Liquid Lounge, which I think was like a porno thing. And then there was Liquid Sound Lounge. Like, that was it. Do you remember those days you would do a search?
Yeah.
Only 2 things would come up, if anything.
Yeah.
Very different time.
What is the connection between roller skating and house music?
I mean, I can only tell you personally for me, which is that I started and I got exposed to my first DJ and music that I hadn't heard on the radio at a roller skating rink in Milwaukee. It was Wisconsin State University. And yeah, I think my parents brought me there. My parents, uh, they're dancers. My mom has since passed, but I mean, till, yeah, she danced until she couldn't anymore. But they also danced on skates, on ice skates, and roller skates as well. Any way of dancing. They had wooden wheels. I remember finding their skates in the attic. But yeah, the roller skating rink. DJs, but me, it was a lot of funk and soul. Like I was listening to, it was when Rick James was out, and George Clinton, and uh Rapper's Delight was a big tune. um I can't really say that I heard house music per se in the roller skating rink then, but when I got to New York, um I found the roller skating circle in Central Park, and it was before it was called the Central Park Roller, whatever, Dance Roller Skaters Association. And I just lived there on the weekend. I loved going there, and roller boogieing was my thing too. I danced on skates. Um, I still have my same skates, my Rydell boots, diamond plates, Zinger wheels. The wheels have been replaced since, because I replaced them for concrete use versus the rink. And yeah, loved it. And I mean, there was house music definitely, but more on the classic side, I think, at that time in Central Park. I didn't hear so much of what was coming out of a club per se, um, in terms of house music at that time entering the flow of the DJ there. I remember when the Central Park Conservancy started and they tried to stop they did stop for a while, the roller skating circle, even though it had been around, I think, from what people told me, from the early 60s, you know. Um, and I remember when somebody had a low power transmitter, and they were like, "Oh, you say it's sound and we don't have a sound permit." So they brought in a little low power transmitter, and then everybody had their Walkman, and you know, you had the radio, AM FM on your Walkman too. And so they would tap into a frequency, you know, it was maybe a 2 or 3 watts. That was it. But you were so close right there, roller skating. You had to wear your headphones, and it was the wildest thing watching, because you were like, wow, this is before silent disco. You know, everybody's moving together, but you couldn't hear sound unless you had, you know, you were tuned in. And so it was really weird. It was like watching a silent roller disco movie. Um, and then it was Leslie from Leslie's Dance and Skate School, that worked with the roller skaters and the Central Park Conservancy. And they were like, well, what do you want? What do you want to happen? What can we do? And they said, well, there shouldn't be drinking. There shouldn't be drugs around. And they said, well, we'll police that ourselves. It's a community. We'll make it safe. And they said, well, you know, and then I think they worked it out so that they gave them the barricades, and then they have their whole crew. They have skate guards that they would set up that were official. And then, you know, the gates would go to the side and be locked up during the week. And then they pull them all back up and bring the sound system in and set it up. I think it became more housey when, like, I think, well, who is it? Oh my God. I know Deuce Martinez. Oh, the DJ.
Nick?
No, the gal. I forget her name now. Oh my God. This is what happens, the pandemic, and you're not around people dancing for almost 2 years. Um, Oh, DJ Misbehavior.
Mm-hmm.
She was a long-standing DJ there before, like, kind of the newer DJs were, not that they were new as DJs, but new to that scene. I think were invited in. Um, is it what's his name? Morales? Bobby Morales?
Mm-hmm.
I forget. Anyways, I'm terrible with names. Off the cuff. I'll think about it tomorrow in the morning and be like, Moimo.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and then Roxy, of course. And I was lucky enough to actually DJ at the Roxy for a roller skating party once. And it was exciting and thrilling because it was really a brilliant space for roller skating. It was a brilliant club, everything. It's sad that it's gone now.
It was fucking fantastic. It was
Yeah,
huge. It was
huge.
huge. It was just.
Yeah,
Mm.
it was amazing. And I know that Danny Krivik kind of came up as a DJ at the rollers at Roxy.
Mhm.
And I was so happy for him when, because he was a hardworking DJ when that all came about with Body and Soul being created and that he was a part of it. I thought it was brilliant.
Mhm.
Um, and um, and then 718 Sessions. I'm so happy for him that everything has evolved. It's been very challenging, I'm sure, right now, but yeah, roller skating. And it's exciting. I mean, the sad thing to me was, after seeing the documentary, what is it, United Skates, or what is it called? It was on
Mhm.
HBO for a while.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, to see how roller skating rinks have disappeared throughout the country. They were really a place of community, but once again, I think it was like an economic thing. Um, to be squeezed out. It's really sad. It's like the things that bring people together, the things that seem to go by the wayside because they don't make enough money or something. I don't know, or they can't afford as costs go up. It's sad.
What advice would you give to the next generation?
Um, Passion, follow your passion, follow your heart, and be smart and learn the business, whatever the business is in that moment, because it's also an ever changing organism. Um, don't cut yourself short um, when it comes to asking to get paid and being paid. I think that's very real. Um, and, find your tribe as well. Like I said, it's very tribal. So find your tribe and your community. And as much as you give, as much as you receive, you need to give as well. I think it's a very reciprocal, it's important. And I think it's important to have an attitude of gratitude, to be humble to some extent, but also know that it's a business. So don't be too humble. Um, and I think it's really finding your crew because nowadays it takes a crew to do a party. You got to have your promoter. That's almost your partner, really. Um, because what is it? What's his name said? Uh, Quincy Jones. The music industry is including, I think, DJing and the whole scene because it's not just playing a record. There's a lot more to it. Um, it's what do you say? 90%, 10%, 90% business, 10% music. So yeah, learn that. And while you should take things personally, you should also keep a perspective of it that it is a business. It absolutely is a business. And I think
Well,
it's using your time wisely too. The internet, a lot of great tools, but what we found is you can suddenly get big numbers and followers or likes or however you want to quantify it. Um, but you still have to know your music well. know your music well and practice. And again, as others will uplift you, you need to uplift them too. And respect for your elders. It's not just a, I remember when kind of culture. And you're just like, you're just old. No, respect, because it is not an easy industry for anybody to maneuver in, and you can always learn something from from anybody that's had to walk that path, without a doubt. I think the toughest thing though in the US is trying to find a financial compensation for your work. That's the most difficult. And I do think you have the tools to create music, or at least the music you're playing, to make it your own. Because that's where I see the unique thing is now, with all the sampling and the effects and all these things that you have now at your fingertips that we didn't have. You know, get to know them, use them if it's your thing, and have fun making the music your own, while respecting the actual music for its original composition and intention too. So yeah, balance.
Is there anything that I didn't ask that you'd like to cover today?
I think the one thing is that and maybe we did this in the first our first session, is that you also have to get involved in being the change. So when it comes to like the work that I had done with Music Workers Alliance, before the pandemic hit, we had formed this, and it was kind of formed out of a lot of us that worked on abolishing the cabaret law here in New York. And so what we were working on was the equity side. Like my fee as a musician or a DJ should not be the same as when I played 20 years ago. It should be more, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we were working on with city council members to try to figure out a way to make this pass, that establishments that were receiving subsidies, so think of it as art institutions like PS1 or the new or the Hudson River, I forget what that's called, parks, they have a whole thing, or the Shed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like let's say you're gonna get a gig there, or the Brooklyn Museum, which some of them now, thanks to, you know, Alana Heiss and her forward thinking and creating Warm Up at PS1, right, as a catalyst to hopefully draw people to Queens, because people weren't crossing the the rivers.
Mm-mm.
Um, they were spoiled by everything still being in their own backyard and living right there in downtown, or living in Manhattan, where just things were more concentrated versus the boroughs. And yeah, so that they should pay a living, they should pay according to where we're at now. So oftentimes what happens is these institutions, they do these events to up their attendance and get people interested in the greater work that they're doing. But they shouldn't be paying the same amount that they were paying 20 years ago.
No.
So that was the kind of work that we were working on. And then the pandemic hit, and then we were helping to petition to ensure that we could connect people in the scene with support. Because suddenly there's your whole livelihood or industry was gone, right? Or on pause. So the Jazz Foundation, the Actors Fund, um, the what's the one through the Academy? There's another organization through the Grammy Academy, and pulling together webinars quickly to educate people as to resources that were there for them as freelancers in the cultural world, in the art world. And then also a greater thing that was being worked on that we started to get into was proper compensation or better. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act was up for review in 2020 by the US Copyright Board. So the first session was January 2020. The next session was June. Even during the pandemic, people finally, got very connected online, which advanced online tools tremendously, to be able to communicate like this, like we are right now with Zoom. But to ask for fairness in the tech platforms when it comes to pirating, and also a fair compensation for our music digitally to be paid fairly. So these were different things we were working on. Shaming Spotify, although they do a good service, right, to get the music out there, shaming them a bit to pay now and give back to artists. And why did we shame them? Just to put a tip cup up and make it up to the user to support you versus and they could, if they intentionally wanted to support the content that they actually make money from, they could, and they could still make a lot of money, but they've chosen not to. Tech has inserted itself, and to me it's almost like it is the virus. So it's just sucking the energy, and it's not fully giving back. And the more commercials or PSAs you see digitally or on traditional TV, or when like Amazon comes on to talk about how great they are and how helpful they've been with this program or that means that they're in a shitstorm because they haven't been doing enough. I've seen a tremendous amount of unionizing in new journalism platforms like BuzzFeed, Vice. So I think the same needs to happen for DJs to somehow create a way, and that's what we're trying to do. There is a working group in Music Workers Alliance, and I think it is going to be a strong organization, because now it is about, you can join as a member by paying a one-time fee or a couple dollars a month kind of thing, so that then they can put the money toward people to actually spend more time on these issues, making them come into fruition. So you need fair compensation for the sale of your music. You need fair compensation for the royalties for when your music is just played. And there's that gray area that's really interesting, which is DJs. If I'm spinning and I'm doing a DJ set and I'm streaming as a video, that hasn't been defined. That's a performance. Although I'm using other people's music, it's a performance now. And that's what's been kind of missing, the role of the DJ Whereas we used to, when it was still brick and mortar and tactile, right? CDs, right? Um, that record label would go and license all those songs from those different labels that me as a DJ was mixing into a set, because they wanted, my fans wanted to hear the music played the way I play it, the way I bring it together. So I feel like the role of the DJ still hasn't been fully realized in terms of compensation for that, and not just looked at as, oh, you're just playing other people's music. The role of the DJ is being a tastemaker, promoter, and creator, really, because that's a unique experience, that performance. So we've been trying to figure out, because there was a lot of takedowns, right? Like you would be Facebook Live and you'd be DJing for your friends and fans and building fans. And all of a sudden, you're like, wow, why did I get taken down? And they're like, oh, copyright, infringement detected, right? And you're like, copyright infringement, because I'm playing somebody else's music. That platform has enough freaking money, and a new model needs to be made that, and also in the digital era where you can identify a song, actually, we should be much further along with that, coming back in return to the creator, and not just from a major label perspective, right? So the major labels are also very much about profit over their artists. So you have to know how to do what I call the dance with the devil, and know what are the pros and cons when you get a deal. Yeah, so know your business. It goes back to that again, but also be active in changing the things that you're not happy with or you find to be extractive and unfair in the economic landscape. So you can't just complain. You got to do something. Nothing changed by just complaining. We got plenty of that. It's easy to go down that negative land. It's so
Seriously.
easy. It's so
Seriously.
easy.
We don't need that. We don't need that.
No. And I mean, I remember when Ellen Harris worked with Mel Sharon and others because a lot of us would complain about, in other words, the whole side of, dance music being a bastard genre, right? We didn't even have a categories in the Grammys for that work, even though it turned into a tremendous amount of sales for those artists, those remixes, right? I think it was Todd Terry was the first one with an Everything But the Girl remix, where he actually negotiated in a to receive royalties for his remix. Because usually it's a remix you're not going to get royalties for, because the original creator of that, you're just making a new version of somebody else's song, and copyright, that's their ownership. But he actually did that, and that was huge. I remember that created huge waves in the industry. They're like, what, he's getting a royalty for that original remix? So I think just as bold and intensely as you have to promote yourself, you also need to, that's what I mean by give, uplift the industry and the models too. Oh, and I want to bring one other thing too, which is really awesome. There's a it happened organically, a group out of, I don't know if they've really gone so far as to become 501c3 status or anything like that, but our environment, global warming, all these things, right? Do DJs ever talk about how are they contributing in creating more greenhouse gases? Are we participating in, and if so, what is our participation besides maybe DJing for a benefit here or there, right? So it's really interesting. It's called DJs for Climate Action. came out of Brooklyn, a couple DJs. I know some of the Soul Clap guys are involved, Nicodemus. Um, really interesting. They do, I think, if it's once a month or once a week, they're on Discord. And so there's a session where you can get involved. But it's DJS, and then the number 4 CA, like climate action. So the acronym. And so they did one collection. You can find it on Bandcamp, right? Of people that contributed. But the thing that they're talking about is how can we contribute, right? And be to a more sustainable world. And here, I'm going to show you this. I actually ordered it. So they found a vinyl manufacturer in I don't know if it's in Netherlands or somewhere in Northern Europe. The details are foggy. That has found a new material to make vinyl out of that's not so toxic to the environment. And so I ordered it because I was like, what is it like? And it's just the same. It's great vinyl, you know. Yes, there's still vinyl heads out there, people. There's people that still collect vinyl. Vinyl is grown once again in popularity because a lot of people that are just not DJs enjoy hearing it sonically better than listening to files on their computer or through a speaker. You know, it's full sound and resolution, right? Versus compression and things. The experience is different. So what they did is they worked with Greenpeace that gave them all these sounds that had been recorded by people in Greenpeace doing actions around the world. So the sound of what it sounds like for an iceberg to suddenly, you know, hear a part of it separate, or endangered species, right? The sounds of a rainforest, or, you know, that's the most kind of obvious. And they put this sound sample pack together and they put out a call for DJs around the world because you can do that now, you know, on the internet. And DJs are really kind of ambassadors because music's like that, right? We know no borders. Music is borderless. It travels everywhere. It gets everywhere. It's amazing. It's also a unifier globally, right? Music. And it's very powerful, right? Activism, music, you know, I love music with messages. Because it has changed our world. If you think about the 70s and the 60s, especially, right? With lyrics and music and hip hop, that's what it does, right? So these are some of the DJs that and are producers that created music from those sample packs. And now this is on, you know, this new vinyl that has less of a carbon footprint to make it, and even later on down the line, when it's discarded. And they're really talking about like there's some sound systems that I saw in their world that work off of solar. And I mean things like that, you know, that there are ways that we can contribute. So yeah.
Awesome. Well,
That's
thank
where
you
I
so
ended.
much. Thank you so much for the interview. I'll keep you posted when
Welcome.
it goes live. Probably in like, probably in about a month or so, within the next month or so. I'll keep
Okay.
you posted.
Yeah, and also Liquid Sound Lounge continues Saturday nights, 7 to 10, streaming out of New York here. I still do it live. I still enjoy being live. I have my co-hosts. Sometimes people don't want to hear the talking. We try to keep it to a minimum, but we absolutely have those discussions about culture, about the political side, about awareness like this, things like that. That's been always a part of the Liquid Sound Lounge besides the music and breaking music and guests, interviews, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. Everybody, please check that out. Liquid Sound Lounge live,
Yeah.
not recorded.
Well, all the archives are up there, so enjoy.
So, well, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day and happy holidays.
Thanks, Moema. You too.
All right, take care. Bye.